I'll sign anything except bad legislation. Kinky Friedman. All right. Good morning and welcome to another episode of the Liberty Dad Podcast, a discussion on politics and culture. If you're tuning in live, thank you so much for giving me your time so early. Do me a favor, folks. If you enjoy the show, be sure. Oops, that's not supposed to happen. Let's go back. I hit the wrong button, so I apologize for that. Let's try this again. Do me a favor, folks. If you enjoyed the show, be sure to like and subscribe to my channel. And for the really serious folks out there, hit the bell so that you never miss an episode. Goodness, got all kind of, there's some behind the scenes things going on here. Nothing super major, but just some couple last minute out of the ordinary, like what in the world? And then I'm scrambling. So I think we'll be okay. I'm a little distracted, but the show must go on and we will do this. So anyway, thank you so much for joining in. We are going to talk about, we're going to do some bill reviews today. Now, there are times when you see or hear something and you wonder to yourself if you have, like the Flash, exited your own reality and entered into an alternate reality. So here I am agreeing with legislation that Gavin Newsom signed, which effectively means I agree with Gavin Newsom. I was like, I had to do like a double and triple take because anybody who's a regular on this show knows I don't agree with him about anything. I think the man is a snake, very dangerous, and like when it was kind of when we started getting the word that Joe Biden might not be the one running, I was like, it's going to be Gavin Newsom and this is going to be bad, because I felt like if there was anybody that could totally beat Trump, it would have been Gavin Newsom. And I have shown videos in the past where he is a snake. Like when he was mayor of, I think, San Francisco, and he sat down with media and they were asking him point blank questions. They were like, okay, so how come, you missed all these different scheduled events? They were, thousands of people were waiting for you and then you just didn't show up. And he was like, well, there was a lot of work to do. I was busy. And they're like, okay, but your chief of staff didn't even know where you are. And he's like, yeah, I'll have to have a talk with him. And that's like it. Like, that's all he wanted. And they were like, okay, so what about this budget? And he's like, yeah, it's out of control. They're like, okay, but how do you explain it? And he's like, we have a lot of work to do. Like, if you haven't seen this video, go look it up. It's crazy. And it's just like and then finally he just kind of gets up and he decides he's done. It was very Donald Trump-esque in a sense. Just not as bombastic. And he, expressed his disappointment in the media for doing their job. Their job is to hold him accountable and say, hey, man, you were supposed to do this, or you promised this, or whatever. What happened? Like, that's their job. And he was acting as if, like, no big deal. Like, whatever. Quit asking me questions. I'm the parent here. You're the kid. Like, that's really how he was behaving. So just so my audience knows, I have strong issues with this man and have had strong issues for many years. So there's no love here. Let's play this video and we will see what we're even talking about today. All right.
If you make money off social media,
that's not very loud.
Your kids, you'll soon have to set aside some of those profits under new laws signed by Governor Gavin Newsom. Eyewitness News reporter David Gonzalez has more on what protections the bills will provide for these young influencers.
California Governor Gavin Newsom is taking steps to protect kids and teens who create online content.
Let me know if you can hear that well, folks.
like Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube from financial abuse. Today, the governor signed 2 laws ensuring child influencers aren't taken advantage of, next to former child star and singer Demi Lovato. Coogan law requires 15% of a child actor's earnings to be set aside in a trust account until they become adults.
No one can touch it, but it's yours when you turn 18, and that's the safeguard that was put in place for the film and television industry for child actors.
Assembly Bill 1880 expands Coogan law to include minors employed as content creators on online and social media platforms, not just jobs under contracts for TV and film. Earlier this month, at the premiere of her new Hulu documentary, Child Star, Demi Lovato advocated for laws to protect kids whose parents are profiting off their image and likeness.
This basically just protects and compensates them so that when they turn 18, they can receive portions of the money and the ability to be able to say, you know what, I want to take my image off of the internet and, you know, kind of be forgotten. It gives them the right to do so.
Governor Newsom also signed into law the Child Content Creator Rights Act. Senate Bill 764 requires content creators who feature minors in at least 30% of their online content set aside 65% of their earnings in a trust account until they turn 18.
That industry has obviously evolved now with
Yes.
online, social media, content creators. There's been this glaring gap,
Yes.
and this legislation basically closes that loophole.
In a statement, the bill's sponsor, Senator Steve Padilla, says California has a long legacy of protecting child performers from financial abuse. It is critical we adapt these landmark protections to keep up with the natural evolution of entertainment. The Child Content Creator Rights Act will go into effect at the start of 2025. David Gonzalez, ABC7 Eyewitness News.
Hello.
All right. So that's basically a summary of what's going on. We're going to get into both of the bills really quickly. It's not going to take very long at all, folks. But the gist of it is that if you are, media has now changed. Once upon a time, if you were in media, then you were like in Hollywood or Atlanta or at some other major production studio. But now everybody can be in media, right? Like literally I have a show. So you know that they just let anybody in media now. And so therefore, they've extended and said, all right, well, these same protections that we have in place for child performers who are going out to Hollywood and their parents are like, look, my little Johnny's super duper cute. Everybody's going to love him in all these commercials or in this movie, right? Remember, we grew up with like the Olsen twins and, various other child actors. What was it? The two Coreys, Corey Haim and Corey Feldman. And one of them ended up committing suicide. So there, and that's not related to financial issues. That's actually related to some other Hollywood issues that they have. So clearly they might be doing a good job with protecting the children financially, but otherwise they're not actually doing such a good job. That's an entirely different story. However, what they're basically doing is saying like, look, if you are the parent and you're enrolling your child into this and your child is making money, then your child should be ensured that they get some of that money so that the parents aren't necessarily getting wealthy off of somebody who cannot consent. So I that's the gist of it. And I think overall it's a good idea. And we'll get into as to why it's a good idea here after intermission in just a moment. But let's walk through some of these two bills and we'll just take a look and see, what it is that what these bills contain. So let's put this first one up on the screen for you. Where are you? There you go. Okay, so this is Assembly Bill 1880. And we're not going to walk through the whole thing. I'm going to give you some of the highlights. And then if you really want to read it, you can. This bill is 2 pages long. So that's already a good start. And I believe that this is 2 pages long primarily because it's adding a portion to an existing bill. So otherwise the added part is actually a lot less than 2 pages. So they're just adding a little bit. So here's like a nice little summary of it. As they said in the video, existing law provides for the establishment of a Coogan trust fund or trust account. This trust account is basically specifically designed for minors and has certain stipulations and all that. but this was designed for child performers in Hollywood, as specified for the purpose of preserving, for the benefit of the minor, 15% of the minor's gross earnings or a greater percentage if requested by the minor's parent or guardian. So this existing law says, like, look, you've got to take a minimum of 15% of that child's money and put it in this account so that it can't be touched and by anybody but them when they become 18. So that way, if they're a child star at 5 years old and they're making a lot of money because, the whole world thinks they're super cute and we're tuning in to see the show, then they get a cut of the money. So then we go down here to page 2. And then here's the for this particular bill, this is this highlight here is kind of what you need to know. Content creator, they've expanded the definition, means an individual who creates, posts, shares, or otherwise interacts with digital content on an online platform and engages in a direct contractual relationship with third parties. Content creators include, but are not limited to, vloggers, podcasters, social media influencers, and streamers. Now, I thought we were done with the word vlogger. I haven't seen that word being used in quite some time until this bill. But apparently it is still a word that's used, at least by government. And they define that, I believe, elsewhere in the next bill. They define what a vlogger is. But effectively, this bill here, this assembly bill, just says, like, look, if you're a content creator, this is how we define a content creator. And then they further say, all right, you have to have a Coogan trust account if you have a child in your content. And there are a lot of people that make content with children in it, right? Like with their children specifically. My son has appeared in my show, sometimes very much on purpose. Sometimes, maybe he just shows up because I'm playing dad and I'm doing podcasting and he comes in the room and he's like showing me something, right? So I don't know if I would count that necessarily, but he does show up in it. And in past graphics, I've had him on there. So I've used my son. I know friends that I have who are like accountants and others that use their children in their promos. And so I think this is a good way to protect children. And we're going to get into the details on that here in just a moment. But I want to show you, since we're doing bill reviews, here is my bill review video, which most of you have probably seen. But this actually has my son in it on purpose. So let's take a look at that video.
But I know I'll be a law someday, at least I hope and pray that I will. But today I am still just a bill.
All right. So that's the video that I have. That's probably the most prominent media content or content that I've used in this show. That and then some graphics in the past that had a picture of me and him together. And so as part of the Liberty Dad brand, my son makes periodic appearances and sometimes I use his image. And for now, he's okay with it because he's 5, right? Like he's pretty much okay with everything. So I can understand why they might say, hey, we need to extend this to online creators and not just leave it at Hollywood. Okay, so let's take a look at this second bill here. And the second bill is SB, what is the name of it? SB 764. So let's put that up on the screen here. And where are you here? Let's see, give me a second here to bring this up. All right. And bam, there we are. All right. So Senate Bill 764. And so here highlighted is basically the summary of the bill itself. Existing law provides for the establishment of a trust for the purpose of preserving, for the benefit of the minor, 15% of the minor's gross earnings. Okay, so we heard that. This bill would require a vlogger, as defined, to compensate a minor under 18 years of age if the minor is engaged in the work of vlogging as specified. This bill would require the vlogger to set aside gross earnings on the content in a trust account to be preserved for the benefit of the minor as specified. The bill would also require the vlogger to prepare a written statement under penalty of perjury that includes specified information relating to the trust account. By expanding the scope of the crime of perjury, this bill would impose a state-mandated local program. So they're basically saying, like, if you're a content creator and you have a child, that you're a vlogger, as we define it, and you have child in your content, then you have to go through these steps because you have a child in it. I'm okay with that because children, again, cannot consent. This bill is 5 pages, so, not terribly exciting, but we're not going to, move that over to messed up that. All right, so let's go down here. So vlog, let's look at some of the definitions and how it defines things. So it says vlog means content shared on an online platform in exchange for compensation. So if you're doing it for free, it doesn't count. Okay. And they don't define compensation. Does compensation include the clicks and likes and you get to be a social media influencer and you're just not making any money? Or is it only about money? I presume it's about money since we're talking about a Coogan Trust account and 15% of that has to go in there. You clearly cannot put in 15% of all the likes or your level of influence, whatever that might be. You could not put that into an account for somebody else, but you can put in money. All right. But, and I assume that if you get to the point where you're influencing, you're considered an influencer, you are making money more than likely. I can't imagine that there's going to be too many people out there who are influencers and not making any money. All right. Vlogger means a parent, legal guardian, or family residing in California that creates image or video content that is performed in California in exchange for compensation. Vlogger does not include any person under 18 years of age who produces their own content. So if you're 17, 16 or 17, and you've got your own YouTube channel and let's say you're playing video games, right? And you're just, maybe you do video game reviews and then people can watch you play video games. And then, you do that. You don't count. We're talking about adults here because what they're establishing is that there is an adult child relationship that needs to be, that they have decided needs a little bit of legal framework for. All right, so we go down, and so here's where they talk about what does it mean if a child is part of your vlogging experience. At least 30% of the vlogger's compensated video content or the vlogger's compensated image content includes the likeness, name, or photograph of the minor. In other words, if 30% of my material has my child in it, then that's when it counts. So if I make a 30-minute video and 10 minutes of it includes my son, then and I'm getting compensated for it, then I qualify as a vlogger under this bill. The percentage pursuant to paragraph 1 is measured by the amount of time the likeness, name, or photograph of the minor visually appears or is the subject of an oral narrative in a video segment as compared to the total length of the segment. So again, if I have 30 minutes and I show a picture of my son for 10 minutes and I'm talking about this story, right? Whatever story I'm talking about, and I'm using that as the basis for my show, and then I get paid for it, I qualify. The number of views received per image or video segment or on any online platform met the online platform's threshold for compensation, or the vlogger received actual compensation for image or video content equal to or greater than 10 cents per view. So basically on YouTube, the way that it works is once you have so many views and you have so many subscribers, then you are eligible for ad revenue and stuff like that. So if I meet this threshold, with the number of views, then I count. The vlogger received actual compensation for image or video content of at least $1,250 in the month. So if I make only $1,000, then I don't, then it doesn't count. But if I make $1,250 or more, then it does count. And so it says, but I will say this, a minor is considered engaged in the work of vlogging when the following are met at any time during a given month. Now it's unclear to me if this is an or an and situation. Do any one of these need to be applicable, or do all of these need to be applicable? I will go with or, and but I could be wrong on that. So that's basically the bill. There's a little bit more to it, but that's a summary of the bill. And I think, in terms of bills, because I tend to, like, I think I've done like 60 bill reviews, and out of those, like 3 have I supported. And generally, when I support a bill, it's because it's deregulating something. I very, very infrequently support a bill that is creating some sort of restriction on people. Uh, Now, when it comes to children, I'm a little bit more flexible. So we're going to talk about that and why I think that's important as soon as we come back from intermission. But before we go to intermission, let's take a look at some comments here and let's see what we've got. So let's see. Do 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 do. Yes, Johannu says agree with Gavin Newsom. Cancel DL. Not a real libertarian. There could be some truth there. There very well may be some truth to that. I might need canceled because, as he said later, I'm not Liberty Dad anymore. I'm now Communist Dad. That's possible. I mean, it's I knew this going in. When I was putting together this episode, I was like, this is not going to go good for my reputation. I'm going to have to show more pictures of my son to overcome this. I'm just sure of it. That's got to be it. All right, let's see what else we got here. Let's see here. To be fair, the media does behave like spoiled children. Why quite a few adults there, time surfing alien, actually behave like children, unfortunately. That's definitely a longer conversation to be had on a different day. Let's see what else we got here. Yes, I think this is important to know. Legacy media is dying. Podcasting / independent journalists are the future. I think so. Now, I don't think that legacy media is ever going to go away entirely. I think you will have a mix of them, and that you won't be able to ignore the legacy media, and you won't be able to ignore the podcasters, and whoever's doing the alternate media. Now, what I hope to see is that journalist, specifically, the journalist will improve on the legacy media side because they've done a shoddy job lately. Like in the last, I don't know, decade or two that I can recall, they've been pretty shoddy. It's the reason I do bill reviews, actually, and the reason that I read studies, because once upon a time I was reading a news article and they'd made a claim about something. They said, I don't, and it was years ago, but they made a claim about a study. They said, this new study shows this. And I was like, wow, that's very interesting. So I went and I went and I looked up the study, and then I just kind of read through it. And it was funny because in the conclusion of the study, the authors, they said, this study should not be understood to mean this, which was exactly what was reported by the journalist. And I was like, so the journalist said this new study shows this, whereas the study itself said, don't reach that conclusion. We just think that this is interesting information and it suggests that more study needs to be done. And so that's when it kind of the light bulb went off in my mind. And I was like, whoa, like they're really not like, they're just reporting whatever they feel like because it was very clear from anybody that read it that the takeaway that the media had was not the correct one. So, I think hopefully now, and I've been noticing that citizen journalists get it wrong a lot. Like there have been, and they do things that I think are highly inappropriate. So we've had some people that remember the lady that got fired for saying dumb things about Donald Trump being shot or the attempted assassination, and she got fired from Home Depot. That was the act of citizen journalist. So they weren't just reporting, but they were destroying somebody's livelihood, right? Like this woman, just a regular person, nobody special. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I just mean like they're not an influencer. They don't have a major account. They just got on Facebook, said something dumb, and then somebody hunted them down and then got them fired. That's crappy journalism. I wouldn't even call it journalism. I would just call that digital vigilantism. I don't really know. Like it's something, but it's bad. And so hopefully by the process of citizen journalists, getting their foothold and working things out, the regular media journalists will start getting better. And because they get better, hopefully, then that will force the citizen journalist to get better. So it's ambitious thinking here on my part. Like, I hope that what ends up happening is, instead of a race to the bottom, we have a race to the top. And hopefully that's how things play out with the alternate media. And I feel like that's going to happen with the podcast realm, right? Here I'm reading and telling you about the bill, walking through it. So if somebody else wants to report on it, well, they have to report on it, better, if they want to make sure that you give them your attention instead of giving it to me. So hopefully that's what's going on. I think I see that happening with podcasts in general, talking heads and whatnot. We'll see if that plays out for journalists. All right, let's see what else here. It's funny here. The Time Surfing Alien says, I don't even watch television anymore. You're right. I actually don't. I mean, I do. I mean, I watch shows on Prime and Netflix. It's very specific shows. So I can go through and I can say, okay, I want to watch a movie tonight. Let me go see what's available. And so I'll go watch it. But most of the time, I'm probably watching YouTube videos, and I have various channels of things that I enjoy. So I found woodworking channels. I've got some channels that help inform me more on, news and stuff like that. And I've got them all categorized, and I follow a whole bunch of channels, and that's what I do now. And for the most part, so if I'm getting news or media or anything that you might have normally done through just regular sitting down, turning on the television when you were growing up and flipping through the channels, I now do that mostly through YouTube. Sometimes for movies and shows, I still go to Netflix and Prime, but otherwise, we don't have cable in this house, and I haven't had cable in 20 or 25 years, something like that. I have not had a cable subscription. So that's pretty nice. I like that. It's almost as nice as not having a car payment, but not quite. Let's see what else we got. This is an interesting question. How does Liberty Dad feel about James O'Keefe and his tactics? The one video that I saw that I thought was very interesting is they were, who was it? Act Blue. I think Act Blue was the PAC, and they went and they were looking at some of their federal filings, and they were like, wow, it looks like they're making a bunch of transactions. Somebody's making a bunch of transactions on behalf of, we'll just say, John Smith. So John Smith made, $300,000 worth of micro transactions, like 10, 15, 20, $50 at a time. And it was, some enormous amount in total. And so then they would figure out, okay, well, who is this John Smith? Where do they live? And so they would go to John Smith's house, and they would knock on the door, and they would say, hey, Mr. Smith, I'm so-and-so, and I'm just doing some reporting. And it appears that you made, $50,000. I don't know the number exactly, but, some thousands of dollars in transactions to Act Blue. Were you aware of that? And sometimes the people are like, no. They're like, in some cases, I think in most cases, they were like, I gave like $100 once or something like that. Like I donated one time, and they were like, and these people, they were in modest homes, and they would say, I wish I had that kind of money to give, but no, I did not. And so they were uncovering this notion that like somebody was making fraudulent transactions on behalf of somebody else. And I don't know where that story went. In that particular case, that kind of reporting, I'm good with. Some of the other ones where they have like the person sitting there, and then the camera's kind of like flipped. So they've got like their phone, and it's sitting on the table, and it's kind of like angled, like, 30-degree angle toward the person. And they're just kind of talking, and they get somebody to say something. And then we find out that it's kind of presented as if this person is somebody that's in charge, or, somebody of some level of importance in a particular organization. And then we find out that they're not really, and you just got them to say something. I'm a little on the fence about those, because here's my thing. Here's what I do for my show. When I'm doing my research, I try to make sure that I cover it well, because I never want somebody to say, DL, you got the facts wrong. Now, my interpretation of the facts can be debatable, and that's fine. But I never, ever want the facts to be wrong, because once the facts are wrong, my interpretation of them is no longer any good, period. And so I don't want to hand somebody an easy win to dispute me. I want you to have to earn it and say, man, DL, you should have spent 4 more hours digging because you would have found this. And then hopefully that this, whatever it might be, would be inconsequential and very debatable, right? Like that's my goal. I never want somebody to just say, oh, that was an easy dunk, ever. And so I feel like some of James O'Keefe's work is an easy dunk when you start looking at some of the facts, and it's not as good and it's not up there where it should be. Some of the other stuff is pretty decent, and so I'm okay with it. I don't like anything that's deceptive or lacks transparency, because the moment somebody can cast doubt on your work, then number one, a good story might go by the wayside, and that's not good. And then number two, if you get enough situations where people can cast doubt on your work, then it's like the boy who cried wolf, right? When you really need them to believe you and to know that you've done quality work, they might not. And there is a particular person that I'm thinking, I'm not going to name them, but they are a citizen journalist. And like 3 times now in the last month and a half, I found that they were wrong. And they did things that I didn't like. It's a woman, and one of the incidents, what was it? Oh, it was that crazy white woman that was yelling at a child. It went viral all over social media, and a black woman stepped in and was like, "Whoa, whoa, you need to back up. We don't yell at kids." Like, and the child's in the stroller. This woman like leans down, starts screaming at this child in a stroller, and this black woman interrupts her and is like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa!" And like everybody's like hailing the black woman as a hero, because she called. Well, then what happened is some citizen journalists decided that they found out who this woman was, and then they started posting her information all over, and then it turned out it was the wrong person. And so then hordes of the internet started attacking this woman. When it leads to that kind of stuff, or when your information is easily debunked, I think that's a disservice. And once, like if you make a major gaffe once, okay. After that, I'm probably not going to be very sympathetic to you, and you need to go off and figure out what it is that you're doing that isn't correct. I don't know what that would be. So, but to answer the question on James O'Keefe, it depends. There are some things where I've seen where I'm like, yeah, this looks good quality. Other things I'm like, like I think you just got someone to say something, on a date. That's the other thing I'm not a big fan of. I think some of the stuff that he's done is one person is on a date with another person, and then at least that's what it looks like. And then they basically get someone to open up under the pretense that it's a date, and they're doing like a sting operation. Not a big fan of that. I think that's, like dating from what I see seems to be hard enough as it is. Let's not make it any harder. All right, let's go to that intermission, and then we will be back, and I'll tell you why it is that I support these bills.
Let us make man. This is the scripture where God was talking about creating the human. And when he talked about creating the human, he said, let us make man. And for me, the us in let us make man entails and implies to me that I should be assisting God with making men. And this is where the X for Boys comes into play. This is the new man-making machine in Albany, Georgia. We started the X for Boys program in January of 2019. Albany, Georgia is one of the poorest cities in the nation. And also Albany, Georgia has one of the highest crime rates in the nation. And so I took it upon myself to curb that by working with young men and boys in the community and teaching them how to work in the skilled trades, such as working on cars, fixing houses, simple home improvement, simple brake repair, oil changes, plumbing, anything of that nature to try and help boys actually use their hands.
I appreciate King Randall for taking the time out of his life to give us young men the opportunity to do things that can help us be better men and better people in life.
The X for Boys is creating men that'll be self-sufficient, that will be able to protect their women and children, and will be able to go out and earn things for themselves. We do not teach victimhood. There is nobody holding us down. I am teaching the boys that they can go out and get whatever it is that they want when they want it to. They have the same Father as Jesus, and that is God. And so they are able to go and do whatever they want to. The scripture says, greater is the God that is in me than the God that's in the world. So it's up to us to teach them about the God that's in themselves and to create everything that they want. Let us make man. Follow us on social media at New Emerging King, and you can go to the xforboys.org for our website.
All right, awesome. So I just wanted to play that. What I'm going to be doing as we go along, I will be looking for organizations that I feel are worth supporting. That's one of them. I actually didn't even realize it was an organization. I follow this account. His name is King Randall, and he occasionally posts these videos of him working with young boys. I think one of the first ones that I saw, or at least that I remember, he was sitting in a car and he had an officer walk up and he demonstrated how to engage with an officer in front of these boys. And then he kind of explained, he was like, why did I do this? Why did I do that? And I know some of libertarians may not like all of the things that he did in that particular video because he was a little bit more talkative. However, what he was training the boys to do, and what in people that came at him later and he was responding, he was like, look, I'm just trying to make sure that if these young boys have a police encounter, that they live to tell about it, that they don't cause any more problems, and so that they can go on about their life, because too many young men decide that they're going to be, aggressive and whatnot. And so he's like, I don't want that. And I kind of felt that because when I was mentoring a young man here in Jacksonville through an organization called Daniel Kids, he once told me about that he had been grabbed up by an officer, and the officer made him sit on the sidewalk and then was checking his ID and all that. And I guess the officer was looking for somebody that he thought this might be the guy. I don't really know exactly. But anyway, right at the very end, the kid tells me, he says, I told that officer if he ever behaved that way again, I was going to turn him in under harassment or something. And I was like, dude, no, no, no. And I was like, shut up. And he was like, what? And I was like, shut up. Stop talking to officers. And he's like, well, I'm trying to get my respect. And I was like, never in the history of policedom has a teenager aggressively postured at an officer, and then the officer turned around and gave you the respect. You never, like, no officer can be like, you know what, teenage boy, you're right. I'm wrong. I'm sorry. Please have a nice day. Like, that's not going to happen. Should it happen? Maybe, but it's not. And so I was like, and I told this kid, I said, do you know why you don't see rich old white men getting shot by the police? I said, because when the police come to arrest him, they're like, Martha, call my lawyer. And then they shut up. That's it. They don't say anything else, right? They just tell Martha to call the lawyer, and that's it. And I said, this is why. So I appreciated that video. I appreciate the videos that I see where he's working with young boys. I saw one recently, which gave me the idea to check out his website, because I didn't realize that he had a website until then. He was showing boys how to install door hinges, install a door with door hinges. And he's walking through and explaining, like, here's what you want to do. You want to do this. And then he gives them a drill, and he's like, all right, now you try it. And so it was great. So I think you should support that organization if you can, or at least follow them on social media and like their stuff. I think that's good. I always got a heart for people, especially for men that want to make their community a little bit better. All right, let's get back to now the issue of why do I support these kind of bills? Okay, we're talking about these two these two bills about influencers, AB 1880 and SB 764. They deal with children when it comes to online creation, content creation. And so very simple, super easy to understand. I'm going to give you my rundown. Number one, everybody owns their self. I believe in self-ownership. I own myself. I've made the argument in the past that if I have a garden in my backyard and I go out and I work the garden, which I actually do, and then I produce some vegetables and some fruits, I own that vegetable and fruit because my labor, which came from my body, went into that produce, into that harvest. And so therefore, I can decide if I want to sell my vegetables and my fruits, or if I want to just eat them all to myself, me and my family, or if I want to give them away. Maybe I just knock on my neighbor's door and I say, "Hey, neighbor, I got a lot of extra carrots. Would you like some?" And they might say, "Yeah." And then I give them some carrots free of charge, right? No compensation whatsoever. I can decide that. Or I can decide that, you know what? That was fun. Let me toss them all away. Yeah, I can do that, right? Like this is because it's my labor. I get to decide that. When it comes to children, the unfortunate thing is that they cannot consent. They cannot consent to a lot of things. Now, when I say that, mind you, I'm not saying that they can never consent. There are some things that they can consent on, and as they get older, their ability to consent becomes better, right? Like they start their consent correlates with maturity to a degree. And so when they're 5, they can't consent to some things that they might be able to consent to when they're 18 or 19 or 20. So for instance, if you're 5, you cannot consent to smoke cigarettes. You cannot consent to sign a legal document. But some of those things a parent can consent maybe on their behalf. So for instance, let me give you a personal example. My son had to have eye surgery a while back, a couple of years ago. He basically had an eye that was, it wasn't, it was straying off to one side. And we went to the doctor to look into it. And after a couple of visits, she determined, she was like, look, this is something that you're probably going to want to have surgery on. And she said, here's the deal. Right now, he's in development and the brain is learning to interpret signals from the eyes. And so what's going to happen is the brain, it's possible that the eye could correct itself. However, if we leave it, either the eye will correct itself or it won't. If it corrects itself, then all is good. No big deal. If it doesn't correct itself, the real problem is that the brain will start just ignoring the signals coming from that eye. And so therefore, the eye will basically become useless. Like it'll physically be like all the connections will be there, but the brain will just say, yeah, those are bad signals. Ignore them. And then she told us, she said, the real problem is that in the future, it's very, very difficult, almost impossible to get the brain to start registering and recognizing those signals. So you take a gamble, if you will. So my son was like 3, so he can't consent. There's no way that he could consent and say, you know what, Dad, given the circumstances, I think I should have surgery. There's no way he could do that. He's almost 6 now. He still cannot consent. So therefore, I had to consent on his behalf. And so with the doctor, I said, okay, well, given this information, let's go ahead and have the surgery. And the surgery was successful and he's good to go. Okay. Now, there are some things that a child cannot consent for, right? So for instance, they cannot consent to intimate activities with another person. Regardless, doesn't matter whether they're the same age or older, especially older, but they cannot consent to that. And so we have to balance and say, okay, well, what do we do? Well, in this particular case, I believe when it comes to child performers, their likeness is being used, right? Let's say that I'm using my son. He shows up all the time. I've got pictures and graphics and Liberty Dad is really like Liberty Dad and Liberty Son, right? It's really more of that show. Well, I'm using him for my benefit. He cannot consent, so I'm kind of consenting on his behalf. But if I'm making money, well, again, going back to my gardening scenario, if I go out and I use my body, then I have ownership of that stuff. So therefore, if I'm using my son in my videos and I'm making money off of using my son in those videos, well, it's his body and his labor, if you will, or at least his likeness. And so therefore he is entitled to compensation. So therefore, because of that, I think it's acceptable for the state, a state, not a federal government. There are very, very few, if any, situations, and I can't think of any at the top of my head, but there are very few, if any, situations where I would accept the idea that the federal government needs to intervene on that level. I think this is all state level, and that can all be handled at the state level, and in some cases even lower, at the local level. So for me, I look at it and I say, if you got a parent who's making money using their child and they're consenting on their behalf, then that child should be a beneficiary. And they unfortunately, when they become of age and say, well, Dad, you used me all this time in your videos and made thousands and thousands of dollars. How come I don't get a cut because I was participating in that and I should be compensated? Well, if I spent all the money, well, then he can't really get anything from me. So I think it's respectable in this particular case for the government on behalf of the child to say, look, because of the way that money works, you can spend it and you can't get it back. Therefore, you need to withhold some certain amount of money. And that certain amount of money, it goes into a particular trust account. And that trust account is designated for that child and only that child, and they can have it when they're 18 to do do whatever they want with. And I think this would be a good functioning society. Now, just so it's clear, I am not an anarchist. So therefore, there will be times where I say, I think it's appropriate for this legislation. Not very many. Like, this is one of the few times, and you will find more often than not that I will be supportive of laws that are protecting the rights of children. That tends to be a big one to me because they cannot consent. And so people have to consent on their behalf. And we have to make sure that if a person would otherwise be compensated, then a child should also be compensated. So if any one of you that's listening or watching were to go in with me on a show, we were going to make the Liberty Dad and the, I don't know, time surfing alien show, right? Well, and we started making money, almost a guarantee that both of us want to be compensated for our efforts, whether it's just simply on YouTube or whether we strike it big in Hollywood and we get a big show on Netflix or whatever, right? We want to be compensated for our work. And so I think it's appropriate to extend that to children and make sure that they do get compensated. And so that is why I support it, because I think it falls squarely within the idea of protecting the rights of the individual. In this particular case, you're protecting the rights of a child who cannot consent. Because I'm going to tell you right now, my son is 5, he's almost 6. If I were to go and say, hey, will you be in my video? Daddy's going to try to make some money. You know what he's going to say? Yes. He's going to say yes. And he doesn't know any better, right? He's not going to be able to say, you know what, Dad, I don't mind being in the video, but I would sure like some of that money so that I can buy ice creams, right? Like, or maybe I want to buy me some cool new Minecraft gear or toys. He loves Minecraft, right? He's not going to be able to necessarily have that conversation with me, and much less negotiate it. And so it's very possible that a parent could use the other person to their advantage and then not compensate them. And we have an understanding of what it means when somebody is using you for your labor and not compensating you for it. It's called slavery. We should always compensate people for their labor, unless they're of consenting age and have decided they don't want it. If I go and I sit down at a restaurant and they say, hey, today we're filming in here, would you please sign a waiver saying that we can use video footage of you? And you're not going to get compensated. Or they might say, we'll give you a discount next time you come in, right? Whatever the case may be. I can consent. I can waive any rights that I have because I'm an adult and I can think that stuff through. Or I can say, I don't want you to use me at all. But a child cannot do that. So on behalf of the child, to protect their rights and to ensure that they are compensated for whatever labor or their likeness, just like anybody else, I think these bills are appropriate. Let's see. Let's see if people in the comments agree with me or if they're like, DL, you're stretching it. Let's see. I'm not seeing any disagreement just yet, but there might be. There's quite a few comments here. Let's see. Here's an interesting comment. My father and I, from Time Surfing Alien, my father and I used to clear land in my youth. He made money. I got fed. That's true. That's true. And I can understand that. Like if if my if my son and I go out and we have a lawn care business when he's, I don't know, 15, and we did a lawn care business together. You could argue and say, well, DL, you're feeding him, you're putting clothes on his back, and that's your primary work. You're just bringing your son along, and he is learning. But I also believe that they should be compensated for their work, specifically for their work, because my job is to feed my child in the first place. So I wouldn't say, well, I have this show where I'm producing that when my son is the primary person or a primary person in the show. And so therefore I'm just gonna say, well, he got fed, so whatever. Like I don't see that as appropriate. I think if I'm making money that explicitly needs him, then he should be compensated as well. Now, when you get to be about 15, 16, 17, I think you start to get to that age where you can consent a little bit, right? You could say, Dad, I want to, like, if I have a lawn care business and my son turns 15, he might say, Dad, I would like to come and learn the trade of lawn care with you. And he might even say, I know you don't make a whole bunch of money. You make enough to feed the family and to pay the bills. So you don't even have to pay me. I just want the experience. I think if he's 15, 16, 17, he can do that, right? He can make that. Is he fully an adult to be able to fully make these decisions? No. And he wouldn't be necessarily at even 19. I mean, how many of us were dumb when we were 19, right? I was. So I think that it's, it gets to be a gray area when they get a little bit older because you're starting to get to a point where they can consent somewhat to some things. But we haven't hit that age of 18, which is really just a defining line. And we can define that line wherever we want it as a society, but it's just a defining line. And it doesn't mean that you are completely a mature adult. I know people that are 30, or I've met people that are 30 who are not mature adults yet. And it's well understood that just because you turn 18, you're not, a full adult. But I think that this is one way of protecting, particularly at least younger people. So if we wanted to argue and say, well, maybe this bill needs to be refined a little bit, we don't like the percentages, or we don't like, certain details, or maybe it should apply to, anybody that's up to the age of, like, say 13 or something like that. And then after that, then the expectation is that these kids have a little bit more voice. That would be fine. I would be okay with, arguing some of the details of this bill, which is why I say it should be at the state level, because California could leave it as is. Florida could say, well, we think that that's generally a good idea. However, we think that it should be limited up until the age of, 13. And so if you're 14 or older, then you should have, you should be able to decide a little bit more for yourself if you want. So these rules don't necessarily govern you at the age of 14 or 15, and we can work out the details. We might be able to say 15% is too little. Florida might say it's got to be 20%. And then some other state, New Hampshire, they could say, well, 15% is too much. We think it should be 5%. And so then you get similar bills in different states trying out different details of the bill to see which works best. And I think that is exactly the way the United States was designed to be and should be. So that's where I sit with this. But I agree. I think that there is some context to be had. And yes, it's possible that you could make the argument, and maybe a certain state might say, "Hey, you know what? We don't need any protections And if, as long as the parent is providing housing, shelter, clothing, food, the basic necessities, then the parents can use them at their will, at their discretion. We could do that too, right? So I'm not saying that we have to have these bills. I'm just saying I accept this bill, and I think it's a reasonable bill for a state to have. That's what I'm saying. I'm also saying that for the first time that I never thought would ever happen, I'm actually in agreement with Governor Gavin Newsom. So that's some wild stuff. All right, folks. Thank you for watching. Hope you found this episode informative and inspiring. Be sure to catch me Monday through Friday, 7:30 a.m. for an informed discussion on politics and culture. Make sure that you're subscribed to my YouTube channel, or if you prefer my Rumble channel, you can go to youtube.libertydad.com, or you can go to rumble.libertydad.com. While you're there, let me know how I'm doing by leaving me a comment, except for all you spammers out there. Last but not least, I want you to remember, if you're a champion of liberty, your business is people and your product is liberty. I want you to have a great week. Catch you next time. But for now, I'm out.